Alright guys, welcome back to another video. Have you ever wondered what it's like for trade in Eriador? It's a bit of an interesting one. Tolkien never really talks about it, but we're going to get into it and see what we can uncover here, because there's a few things to talk about here. So yeah, as I was saying before, Tolkien really didn't write about the economics in Middle-earth, so we basically just got to take a guess of what happened here. Now, as you all know, Eriador is pretty depopulated. There's a lot that's going on there, or not much at all if you think about it. There's a bit of trade happening in certain parts of Eriador, but we're going to get into it. Before we get into it, I briefly just want to say that it is, although it's underpopulated, it's more populated than people think. That if you're looking at surrounding Breelands, I feel like by this point, a lot of farms that have popped up over time, I think there's a few more people than people think, is my thoughts on it. I've got a little image now just to show what ChatGPT estimates a population to be. Obviously, there's some nuance there, but I think, as you can see, Shire probably has the most, and then there's a few other areas that have a fair bit as well. But the Shire is up there for sure. And same with like Breeland. Elves are surprisingly, it makes sense, the elves have a pretty low population. Dwarves, even in the Blue Mountains, I feel like 20,000 is pretty low. My stats say that. I think it's more than that. I also briefly want to mention that one scene in The Hobbit, right before they get attacked by the trolls, they come across that farm, and that farm is all the way to the east of Eriador. So if there's a farm that far east, it means there's probably farms scattered throughout Eriador. Granted, that was The Hobbit. It could have been a one-off thing, but I suppose we could start in the west of Eriador, which is probably the most populated, in my opinion, mostly because of the Shire. But we'll start right up the top. We have the Blue Mountains. I think these guys, over time, probably have built up a pretty strong population, just because it's a peaceful area, relatively speaking. All the other dwarves are in places like Erebor, the Iron Hills, maybe some parts of the Misty Mountains. But overall, they're in the thick of it most of the time, especially during wartime. But the Blue Mountains is pretty peaceful, and that in The Hobbit or in The Lord of the Rings, where the dwarves are traveling westward. But I think because of that, the Blue Mountains is a pretty ideal spot for a dwarf. So I reckon they build up a pretty strong economy. With that, some trade, so they're probably producing minerals, craftsmanship, armor, weapons, tools, and things like that. Probably not as much food, so I think if there's any trade happening, it might be with farms in the surrounding areas, whether that's shirelings or just men just farming, especially for farming tools. I can imagine dwarves would make some pretty nice and sustainable tools. Elves in the blue, in the, what are they called, the Grey Havens, I think that they're pretty low in population, pretty secretive. There might be a bit of trade with the Blue Mountains, but I think it's pretty scarce. Mostly the Blue Mountains are going to be trading with hobbits and men, and even then it's probably going to be pretty isolated. What can I say? Next we have the elves, which obviously wasn't, the elves aren't the most open of people. They're pretty stick to themselves kind of people. To be fair, most groups in Eriador are, but not much trade happening with the elves, I don't think. They do have ports and things like that, but outside of that, not much is going to be happening. Next we have the Shire. So these guys probably have the highest population in Eriador. Still pretty secretive, but towards their east farthing, where they have a bit of crossover with Bree, I think there's going to be a fair bit of trade happening there, mostly agricultural based trade. In the south of the Shire, you're going to have the Tooks producing pipeweed, which is going to be pretty important, I'd say, especially as we know Saruman got his hands on it. So the more people get their hands on this stuff, the more people are going to want to trade with it. Although in terms of that reality, probably not as much trade was happening with that, but a lot of trade potential, I'd say. West Farthing, in the far reaches of the West Farthing, there's a little bit of trade with those Blue Mountain dwarves, but outside of that, not much really. Mostly internal trade, I'd say. But yeah, it's kind of the Shire, pretty simple, mostly producing farming, bit of hospitality maybe for some dwarfs passing through. But that brings us to our next point, which is Bree. So Bree's most underrated, probably trading opportunity is hospitality. So there's a lot of travellers coming through Bree. So places like the Prancing Pony is going to be a good spot for trade and bringing in a bit of cash. I think ale's another big one, farming again, and things like that. So pretty simple economy really. And again, all this trade isn't really massive supply chain. It's more just one-off exchanges and things like that. So nothing crazy, but there's a bit of something going on there. Okay, so I guess we can look. Okay, so we've covered the west. We haven't talked about the east and south. So before we move on to them, they're pretty docile, if I'm being honest. Not much happening in the rest of those places. But we can talk about why the northwest is probably cut off from trading with the rest of Eriador and the rest of Middle Earth for that matter. Number one is the Misty Mountains. That cuts off a massive chunk of potential trade routes. Pretty much the only way you're getting to the other side is through the Gap of Rohan. You could try the mountain pass, but it's just too difficult in most cases, especially for consistent trade. But in terms of south trade, you have decent road up until Tharbad Bridge. That pretty much cuts off any kind of supply chain that would have been good. If that bridge was back, I think things would be a lot different, but the loss of Tharbad Bridge is a big L for the trading economy in area, so that's something to think about as well. The east-west road's probably the main spot for travellers. They probably come up from the south through not the Great South Road, but maybe a separate road because of Tharbad Bridge. Hit somewhere around maybe Weathertop and then turn west. I think that's probably the most obvious trade route. Towards the east, we have Rivendell. Rivendell, as you saw in the population chart, they have a pretty small population. Honestly, ChatGPT thought 500. I think it's a bit more than that. I'm going to say 1,000 to 2,000. But even then, it's going to be a one-off trade, a bit of hospitality for travellers, and maybe like special items. Just what's the word for it? Miscellaneous things. So random objects that they can trade off, which they wouldn't trade off in the first place. And Rivendell's also a hidden realm, so they wouldn't be trading too often there. Next we have the last spot in Eriador. Before we go south is the Dundine Ranges. The ranges have that, they have the angle between the two rivers. That's where they're based. But they're under a population of 10,000 less, like 5,000. They're scattered throughout Eriador. Any trade that's happening is going to be probably more hunting, pelts, food, maybe different herbs they found in the wild and things like that. But outside of that, they're busy. They're already busy enough fighting orcs, so not too much happening there. If there is trade, it's like one-off trades with local communities and more so within themselves. A relationship with Rivendell, they're probably the closest out of everyone there with Rivendell. Next, last but not least, we have the clans to the south. We have Enid, Waif, and Dunland. There's not too much to say about these guys. They're pretty, from what we know, they're pretty uncivilized. I can imagine a bit of trade with Rohan for Dunland during peacetime, but even then, it's probably pretty primal stuff. I don't think a lot's going to be happening. Maybe agricultural trade, maybe some diplomacy here and there. But that's probably an underrated one, to be fair. But as we all know, things get a bit dicey a lot with Dunland, so not a sustainable one there. And then Enid Wave to the west probably has even less people than Dunland and probably even more irrelevant. I could imagine maybe a bit of trade around towards Gondor, but that whole place is pretty mysterious. So I just don't see that at least happening a lot. So that's the rundown on Eriador, guys. A lot of trade in the northwest, but outside of that, it's all pretty scattered and not a lot going on. I'd say Blue Mountains are probably the most underrated. The Hobbits are probably the powerhouse, if there is a powerhouse in Eriador. Most underrated is probably the Dwarves for sure. But yeah, guys, I hope you did enjoy, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.